is the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation.
(8:45). This is the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. Here is the news edited by Danushka Madhavella and read by Indrani Senanayaka. The headlines. President approves farmer subsidy for Yalla season. 25th session of the EU-Sri Lanka Joint Commission will commence tomorrow. Sri Lanka and Bangladesh to resume talks for bilateral trade deal this month. Over 9,000 affected due to bad weather. In foreign news, officials probe Texas mall shooting gunmen's possible far-right links. And in sports news, Carlos Alcaraz wins Madrid Open title with victory over Jan Lennard Struff. The Finance Committee in President Ranil Wickremesinghe have approved the proposal presented by Agriculture Minister Mahinda Amarawira requesting approval to issue a voucher for the farmers to purchase urea fertilizer, MOP or organic fertilizer according to the farmer's choice for this year's Yalla season. The government has decided to provide a subsidy of 20,000 rupees per hectare and 40,000 rupees per 2 hectares for urea and MOP fertilizers in the Yalla season. The government is expected to spend 11 billion rupees for this purpose. The Agriculture Minister says by using this money, the Agriculture Ministry has made arrangements to allow farmers to buy urea fertilizer, MOP fertilizer or organic fertilizer if they want from the public sector or the private sector without any hindrance. Also from the 2023-24 season, the government will withdraw from the responsibility of providing fertilizer and a program will be implemented to transfer the supply of the most needed fertilizer to the private sector. But steps will be taken to credit the necessary subsidy money to the farmers' accounts to buy fertilizers. The Agriculture Ministry also said that this amount may be 40,000 rupees or 50,000 rupees or even more. The 25th session of the Joint Commission between Sri Lanka and the European Union will be convened tomorrow at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Colombo. The meeting will be co-chaired by Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka, Aruni Wijewardena, and Deputy Managing Director of Asia and the Pacific of the European External Action Service of the EU, Paola Pampaloni. The Joint Commission will deliberate on a broad range of bilateral and multilateral issues of mutual interest to both sides and discuss areas for future cooperation. The outcome of the 3 working groups established under the Joint Commission, namely the Working Group of Governance, Rule of Law and Human Rights, the Working Group on Trade and Economic Cooperation, and the Working Group on Development Cooperation will also be discussed in detail during the meeting. The European Union delegation will brief on the new cycle of the EU GSP regulation to be adopted for 2024 to 2033, which will be effective from the 1st of January 2024 for the next 10 years. The previous session of the Joint Commission meeting was held in February last year in Brussels. This news comes to you from the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation.
People's Bank Excelsior. Live the life you want.
We continue with local news. Sri Lanka and Bangladesh plan to hold an introductory meeting virtually on the 29th of this month to commence negotiations for the proposed preferential trade agreement, which is expected to eventually lead to a free trade agreement. The two parties are expected to finalize dates and venues to hold negotiations on the proposed PTA during this virtual meeting. Veerasinghe shared that the two countries are planning to commence negotiations for the proposed PTA with plans to expand it on an FTA eventually. The Disaster Management Centre said due to the prevailing bad weather, 9,034 people from 2,178 families in Colombo, Kaluthara, Negombo, Badulla, Trincomalee, Ratnapura, Kagala, Jaffna, Mullaitivu, Puttalam and Kurunegala districts were affected as of 6 a.m. yesterday. Negombo police said that a person went missing due to the overflowing of the Depa Alla in Hunupitia, Lazarus Road. The missing person is a 60-year-old father of 4. In the 24 hours that ended yesterday, 8:30 a.m., a rainfall of 117.4 millimeters had been received in the Jaffna area. As of 9:30 a.m. yesterday, there was no dangerous situation in the rivers. Valid till 9 a.m. today, the National Building Research Organisation in Badulla, Gaul, Kagala, Kurunegala and Matale districts, also Passara, Baddegama, Nagoda, Alpitia, Yakkamulla, Yatiyantota, Rambukkana, Darniyagala, Mavanella, Kagala, Galigamua, Ridigama, Mavatagama, Alauwa, Polgahavela, Palpola, Divisional Secretariat divisions have issued the first phase warning notice for landslides. That ends the local segment of news.
People's Bank Excelsior, a comprehensive banking services package with a branded checkbook as well as debit and credit card exclusively for you. People's Bank Excelsior, for professionals who dare to dream.
The main news story is brought to you by Siddhalepa Vedamahatmya.
The Lanka Coal Company says that 30 ships of coal have already been brought to the country as requested by the Ceylon Electricity Board in writing. Shehan Sumanasekara, Chairman and Managing Director of the Lanka Coal Company, says that the unloading of coal from the 28th to the 29th ships are currently being carried out. He expects the unloading of the 30th ship will be completed in about a week. He also said since the country's coal requirements have been met, the program to bring coal will be started again in September. He said that out of the 30 coal ships brought to Sri Lanka, only 22 ships have been fully paid and the remaining 8 ships have been acquired on credit basis. That was the main news story.
The main news story was brought to you by Siddhalepa Vedamahatmya.
We now take a look at Watchlight. The Agriculture Minister says that only 5% of the farmers have purchased MOP fertilizers from the money given to the farmers for fertilizer purchasing in the last Maha season. The Asian Development Bank provided an 8 billion rupees to the government for the purchase of MOP fertilizer in the Maha season of 2022-23, and the amount was credited to the accounts of the farmers themselves by the Agrarian Development Department. It was revealed that only about 5% of the farmers have taken steps to purchase MOP fertilizers with the money given in the form of 10,000 rupees for 1 hectare and 20,000 rupees for 2 hectares. These facts were revealed in a discussion led by Agriculture Minister Mahinda Amarweera last week. The chairman of the two government-owned fertilizer companies presented facts that although the Minister of Agriculture imported 36,000 metric tons of MOP fertilizer, the farmers have bought only 5 to 9% of the total amount. Now we take a look at world news. First, the headlines. Officials probe Texas mall shooting gunman's possible far-right links. Russia launches biggest kamikaze drone attack to Ukraine. Woman survives on wine during 5 days stranded in Australian bush. Federal authorities are investigating whether the gunman who killed 8 people, including children, at a Dallas shopping mall had a far-right link. The attacker, who was shot dead at the scene by a police officer, had been named as Mauricio Garcia, aged 33. Investigators are reviewing social media to look into his ideology. During the attack, he wrote a clothing patch with the letters RWDS, which stands for Right-Wing Death Squad. This is a phrase popular among right-wing extremists and white supremacy groups. A law enforcement source told CBS that on line of inquiry in whether he was motivated by these ideals and whether he had links to like-minded people, the gunman used an AR-15 style rifle and wore combat gear during the shooting, with multiple rounds of ammunition found on him. Air raid sirens have sounded across Ukraine after Russia launched a fresh wave of drone and missile strikes. Explosions were heard overnight in the capital Kyiv, where the mayor said 5 people had been injured in the biggest kamikaze drone attack so far. 1 person was killed in the attack on the southern Odessa region. Ukraine's Red Cross says its warehouse was hit. It marks the 4th attack in 8 days on Kyiv and comes just 24 hours before Russia celebrates Victory Day. The annual holiday commemorates the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany during World War II, a conflict the Kremlin had baselessly tried to draw parallels with since launching its invasion of Ukraine last year. A 48-year-old woman survived 5 days stranded in the bush in Australia by eating sweets and drinking a single bottle of wine. Lillian Ip set off on what was meant to be a short trip on Sunday, travelling through the dense bush in Victoria State. She hit a dead end after taking a wrong turn, and her vehicle became stuck in the mud. Ms. IP, who doesn't drink, only had a bottle of wine in the car as she was planning to give it as a present. After 5 nights stranded, she was discovered by emergency services on Friday as they flew overhead as part of a search. To end this bulletin of world news, the headlines again. Officials probe Texas mall shooting gunman's possible far-right links. Russia launches biggest kamikaze drone attack on Ukraine. Woman survives on wine during 5 days stranded in Australian bush. That ends this bulletin of world news.
Development news.
The circular to redeploy state employees who are contesting the local government elections will be issued by the provincial councils and local government ministry today. The ministry has submitted the relevant request for the approval by the Election Commission. Accordingly, these candidates will be reinstated to the nearest service requirement outside of their electorates. That was development news. On to sports news. World number 2 Carlos Alcaraz retained his Madrid Open title with a 3-set victory over Germany's Jan-Lennard Struff. The 28-year-old Spaniard won 6-4, 3-6, 6-3 for his 4th trophy on the ATP Tour this season and the 10th overall. Alcaraz is the second man to defend his title in Madrid after compatriot Rafael Nadal did so in 2014. He will replace Novak Djokovic at the top of the world rankings by simply playing in Rome next week. And we continue with sports news. Andy Murray won the first title in nearly 4 years by beating Tommy Paul in the final of the ATP Challenger event in Aix-en-Provence. Britton Murray, 35, came back from a set down against American top seed Paul to win 2-6, 6-1, 6-2. It is a 3-time Grand Slam champion's first title since winning in Antwerp in 2019 and his first on clay since 2016 in Rome. It is his first title at the second-tier challenger level since 2005. That was sports news.
Go ekakthiyana youth ekat life eke change ekat niyameta set wenna as wahagena dagapuhina habe karanna youth ekat niyameta set wenna friendship ekamenna.
The all-new NSB Ithru account, NSB IAM, a plan for your dream.
Business News, sponsored by National Savings Bank, the safest place for your money.
Uber's former chief security officer has avoided jail and been sentenced to 3 years probation for covering up a cyber attack from authorities. Joseph Sullivan was found guilty of paying hackers $100,000 after they gained access to 57 million records of Uber customers, including names and phone numbers. He must also pay a fine of $50,000 and serve 200 hours of community service. Prosecutors originally asked for a 15-month prison sentence. Sullivan was also found guilty of obstructing an investigation from the Federal Trade Commission.
Business News, sponsored by National Savings Bank, the safest place for your money.
Go ekak thiyana youth ekata life ekේ change ekata niyameta set wenna as wahagena dagapu hina habe karanna youth ekata niyameta set wenna friendship ekata menna.
The all-new NSB Ithru account, NSB IAM, a plan for your dream.
On to economic news. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has warned a failure to raise the U.S.'s debt ceiling could have dire consequences. Without an agreement to increase what the federal government can borrow, it could run out of money by early June. At that point, the federal government might not be able to make wage, welfare and other payments. That was economic news.
Weather report.
And finally, we take a look at the weather report. Showers or thundershowers will occur at times in the western, Sabaragamo, central, northwestern and southern provinces. Several spells of showers will occur in the northern province and in Trincomalee. Showers or thundershowers will occur at several places elsewhere over the island, particularly during the afternoon or at night. Strong winds of about 40 to 45 kilometers can be expected at times over the western and southern coastal areas and along the western slopes of the central hills. To end tonight's news broadcast, the headlines again. President approves farmer subsidy for Yalla season. 25th session of EU-Sri Lanka Joint Commission will commence tomorrow. Sri Lanka and Bangladesh to resume talks for bilateral trade deal this month. Over 9,000 affected due to bad weather. In foreign news, officials probe Texas mall shooting gunman's possible far-right links. And in sports news, Carlos Alcaraz wins Madrid Open title with victory over Jean-Lennard Struff. And that ends tonight's news broadcast.